a little bit cranky. So cool. I'm going to try to turn down my volume just a little bit. A couple of things. I'm recording our conversation, so once we start, I'll refer to you as. Do you like Patrick or Dr. Duffy?
You can go Patrick.
Patrick, okay. So basically, the kind of questions that I have are really how to do the work of a cultural liaison, a diversity dean, diversity coordinator. Those are the kinds of terms that folks are using. And so if we can just kind of have a conversation about that, that would be what I'm really looking at.
Sure, I'll do the best I can. I've never been in that role, but I've worked with and have hired and have coached people in those roles.
Yep. So, that's really the part that I want to kind of focus on in terms of someone who's hiring that kind of person. What kind of leadership are you looking? What skills are you looking for from them, and that kind of stuff?
All right.
Cool. So let me just make sure everything is up and going. We are recording, so that's good. So, first of all, I want to say, Patrick, thank you for agreeing to do this interview. It'll be a part of our curriculum for our Summer Institute. So I'm sure the students and the people participating in this Institute will appreciate your words. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and kind of what are your educational credentials as it relates to K-12 education?
Yes, so I've been an educator for 20 years in K-12 public ed. I worked for 10 years as a secondary social studies teacher, both middle school and high school, taught every grade level between 7th grade and 12th grade in some capacity. I worked as the racial equity coordinator at a high school for 3 years at Hopkins High School, where I coordinated our racial equity team of staff. I coordinated our CARE team, which was Collaborative Action Research for Equity. I coordinated and helped facilitate our partnership with parents of color, and then helped found our Dare to Be Real student leadership group at that time. From there, I have worked as an assistant principal in Edina, worked as a middle school assistant principal, worked as an urban principal of a K-8 school, been the director of leadership development of an urban district, and have supervised principals, coached principals, and most recently have accepted a job as the director of curriculum and instruction for St. Louis Park. So I've worked in a variety of capacities, coaching, supervising, and developing others. In all of those roles, whether as a teacher or as a coordinator, or as a supervisor, I've seen my primary job as that of developing people and developing systems for equity. And with that, because of my training and my first leadership foray as a teacher, that has been done with a racial equity lens throughout my professional career. So
yeah, so
that's my work.
You gave I mean, your resume is just impressive. I'm just excited that I've been able to kind of get a hold of you just to kind of have this conversation. So when you talk about this idea of racial equity, what are you saying? Because some folks think that that's kind of this liberal leftist agenda to kind of talk about all sorts of touchy-feely things, or that there's no real definition to that. So when you talk about this idea of racial equity, how do you operate with that term?
Yeah. So for me, it has been it's transcended politics. To do racial equity at its truest form in schools There needs to be a critique of liberalism and conservatism. And there needs to be a look at the psychological, institutional, and sociological changes that need to happen within a system to be able to get students what they need. And that means, from a racial equity lens, what do our students of color, particularly our black and brown students and our indigenous students, but also what do our white students need to be able to become more racially conscious and to be able to have efficacy within the school system, to see that they can be self-actualized and reach their full potential, not just as scholars, but as individuals who understand and have a healthy sense of their racial and cultural identity.
Well, there are, there are people out there that believe that this idea of, diversity or equity is really actually destroying the fundamental aspects of education and competition, and is, particularly in one district, one of the districts that you worked in has been the subject of a lot of articles and scrutiny in regards to using kind of racial equity lenses or whatnot. How do you combat that? How do you talk about that in ways that people who might not necessarily see those values? Like, why would it be important to somebody who doesn't have a student of color in their household? Why is that stuff important?
So there's a lot there. So what I would say is you can't have excellence in education without equity. We need to redefine the paradigm of what it means to have an excellent education system and to have excellence for all students. And that requires us to relook at how we define and develop our students as leaders, and also develop their skills to be able to be successful in the workplace and in higher education. And of course, there's a place for competition in a democratic capitalistic society like ours, but without developing collaboration and empathy and a sense of identity, that work is going to be very empty in today's day and age. So I think those that are forward thinking and understand the need for evolution in our public education system recognize that this is the core of our work across all content areas.
So you did mention that you were in a position where you would hire and manage and monitor kind of cultural liaisons or intercultural specialists or kind of diversity coordinators or deans of diversity. What were you looking for in terms of people that you were hiring? And then what kinds of skills either did they come with, or did you need, or you sought to develop in them as you were kind of working with them?
So the number one thing I looked for first, and this was something I looked for in anybody I hired in the school system, but what I looked for was a student-centeredness. Were they going to see themselves as advocating for students above all else? And I wanted to be able to see that that was the mindset in which they were entering into the work. The second piece was a strong sense of values around equity and understanding what they would stand for and which sort of things would be at the core of all of their work, which values we're going to lay out. I wanted to see someone who would bring their values into the workplace. I know that's not something that all of my colleagues always looked for, but that was something that I thought was absolutely important. I wanted to know who these people were, and would they be open about that up front, or was it something that they felt had to be in the shadows? I wanted them to be able to speak in an interview to who they were, what they believed, and what sort of person they wanted to be professionally and personally. The other piece, I always believe that technical skills can be developed. So to me, I looked for the adaptive skills of being able to work with people and meet them where they were at. So could someone who came into this role, and typically someone who was hired for this role was someone who had not been licensed or had worked in a classroom as a classroom teacher, could they recognize the hierarchy in schools and the fact that there's cultural authority that's often ascribed to classroom teachers, particularly core content teachers, and that they see themselves as having that authority in the building? Could they work with them? Could they see themselves as a developer of those teachers, but also someone who could work alongside them and help those teachers develop the skills and the relationships with the kids that often required us to be able to get a cultural liaison? Often in buildings, what I've seen is, what I saw as an administrator was the kids that were sent to my office, 75 to 80% of all of the students sent to my office as an administrator were there because there was some assault upon their identity in some way. At the core of whatever disruption there was in the class, between students or between staff and students, the student was feeling like they were not being seen, heard, or valued for who they were. And that was at the core. And there was usually a broken relationship between teacher or another staff member and the student. The cultural liaison had to be able to not only build a rapport with the students, but also build a mindset and build relationships with staff, so the staff could also develop their capacity to be able to work with students similarly to the cultural liaison. So it wouldn't just be the cultural liaison being the only conduit for anything positive for our students of color. Does this make sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah. How do you even get to a place to develop those skills? I mean, that is a fine line and a fine dance that you have to come with. Is it skill based? Is it trial and error?
I think it's value based. Andre. I think
all right.
I think it's a value of when I say, does someone come in with a sense of who they are and how they're going to advocate for students, but do they also have a sense that they recognize that the other adults in the building may not have the lived experiences that they have? So how do they help work with a staff member or multiple staff members who may have 20, 30 years in a system having done it a certain way, but don't have the lived experience to be able to connect with students of color on the same way? I often, was hiring young men and women of color who were working with veteran white women, was often the demographic. And how did you build rapport and credibility with these teachers who felt very strongly about their ability to do well in their craft, and might be defensive to saying that they can't build relationships with kids the way that these liaisons could, so that was always, you're right, it's a fine line, but I think it's a mindset that the best liaisons came in with. Not that they would roll over and allow a teacher to dictate the terms of the relationship with the student, but would rather develop a relationship to the point where they could be seen as a resource to multiple staff members in the building and as an asset in the building. And that took time in every setting I've been in to be able to do that. And it started with them really knowing the students and getting into classrooms and getting into multiple settings to be able to see really what is the culture of the building. I think in some ways a cultural liaison has to have the mindset of an ethnographer, really understanding what is the culture of this building, how has racism and anti-racism been defined in this building, consciously or not? And how can I help dismantle that in a way that's going to last and is going to both address the urgency of addressing the needs of the students who are in front of me now and address the long-term capacity building of the teachers who are going to be here for the next 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, I liked, I love the value-based way of kind of looking at things in terms of people having a skill set that has to be value-based, right? And
Yep.
your lived experience is worth something in terms of bringing that to the conversation, because that's
Absolutely.
where their validation comes from, is their lived experience, right? So can you also said something that pricked me quite a bit, and it's something we'll talk about through these sessions, is this idea that there was an assault on someone's person, right? Their racial identity or their sexual orientation or their ability or disability, what have you.
Yes.
That there was this assault on their, and we will use the term, or terms, safety, significance, and belonging is what we're all seeking, right? But there was been some kind of assault on that. Can you give us an example of one of those assaults? And then how did the cultural liaison kind of, one that you've worked with or coached, how did they massage that or help to heal that harm caused by that assault on their personhood?
Well, I would say the most common assaults were microaggressions. The most common ones were the unintentional slights toward students of color, or hyper visibilizing, I don't know if that's the term, but making hyper visible actions that students of color were doing that white peers were engaged in the same way, but were being ignored or being applauded. And when students then would finally have enough and do quote unquote disrespectful or insubordinate behavior to the staff member, they would be sent to the office. So the multicultural liaison or specialist in some way could recognize this and get to the heart of this. I think the best administrators do this as well. They get to the heart of what was at the root cause of the student feeling disrespected to the point where they became insubordinate or disrespectful to the adult. And then the adult said, "I'm done. I'm sending you away." This happens in schools over and over again. It's happened in my 10 years as an administrator. I've seen it happen repeatedly. And the best adults in the system that work and massage that in some way validate the microaggression. They validate, or sometimes even the aggression or the assault. Sometimes it's not micro, it's macro. They validate it, they name it, and then they work through solutions with the student on how to get to the core of that and to be able to address that and address it in a more assertive way, maybe a less passive-aggressive or aggressive way. But then also are gifted at being able to work with the adult or the other adults that are the perpetrators of this, or the other students who are perpetrators of this, and help them see how what they said or what they did cut to the core of another's identity, and helping them see the possibility of that. And it's a fine line, because I've seen many, I've been in the role myself where there's an anger to come to the defense of the student. And I think the skill set and the value based of looking at the humanity of the adult or the assaulter in the situation, and trying to help them see the possibility that what they did was an assault on another's identity. That's a really tough skill set and row to hoe, because I would say I've seen relationships fractured when that conversation doesn't go well. But I've also seen I've seen the pattern continue and escalate when it's not addressed. So, you have to risk the possibility of a fractured relationship among the adults. But there also has to be that mindset then, like I said, that comes in with, am I going to see your humanity? Am I going to recognize and acknowledge your experience that might be different from mine? But then am I also going to be able to be strong enough to establish that here are values that I hold and I'm going to share with you, and I'm going to help facilitate a healing between this student and you as a staff member, and how you've perpetrated this in some way. It's not easy work, but it's the work of schools that when I've seen go unaddressed, that's when you see the disproportionality in student suspensions, expulsions, referrals, opportunity and achievement gaps exacerbated that are happening throughout our systems.
Yes. So I do have a question. How long? So you're talking all this good stuff. This is great stuff, right? But as teachers have lots of stuff to do. I'm the cultural liaison. I'm going to work this process. How much time is this going to take? It's oftentimes what a teacher wants to know, right? Like, how long does this take to get this done?
So it's ongoing. It's ongoing. It's forever work. But the piece that I would say is, can you as adults get to the point where you recognize that the 20 minutes we spend on this now, which may cut into your prep time, is so valuable because this is what's going to potentially keep this from being a regular occurrence in your classroom and in the hallway outside your classroom. And without putting the time in, we're going to be spending 2 or 3 minutes weekly throughout the year. 20 minutes now might put an end to it, might change your practices, and might change your students' relationship with you for the long term. So it was always a sense of, give and take in that regard.
Yeah. So what resources would you suggest that a cultural liaison might want to pursue to get a better sense of not only themselves but how to operate in that space and either develop a culture where we can have these conversations or live in a culture where we're able to have those conversations between adults and students and their families?
So I'll tell you what I've used that I have found helpful. One I would say is I would not take a job as a cultural liaison unless I am assured that the principal sees themselves as the primary equity leader in the building. If they are hiring you as an equity liaison to be the primary equity leader in the building, then you are destined to fail. So I would say the number one resource is to go into an interviewing that principal about what their commitment to racial equity and to cultural proficiency is, and what resources that administrator is going to use to be able to not only support but to lead this work in the building. Okay, that would be primary. I would say as a principal, I saw the equity liaison or the multicultural liaison or whoever it was as an integral part of the team, not as the person that I was counting on to be the be-all and end-all of this work. And with that said, we would engage in equity walks as a team, and we would go together to get multiple perspectives on what we're seeing in classrooms. We would engage students in groups together, collaboratively. And then I would send forth the equity liaison with aspects of what we had learned together collaboratively. So that way there was at least the umbrella of saying, I'm doing this on the behest of the principal, not on my own accord. And now there was some protection in that regard. I find the film The Color of Fear as one of the greatest examples of how people across race can discuss and have courageous conversations across identity together. It isolates race because it's all men in the film talking about their lived racial experiences, and some of the examples and I would say tools that they use in that film to try to get through to each other are still relevant today, even though it's a 20-year-old film. I would say the book Other People's Children, particularly the chapter The Silenced Dialogue by Lisa Delpit, is essential reading for anybody that's going into this work. It describes the warm demander that we want to coach our teachers to be, and looks at how we can honor the identity of our historically marginalized students while also teaching them the culture of power within a building. I think The Dream Keepers by Gloria Ladson Billings lays out probably the most beautifully what it takes to teach students of color at the highest level, and gives vivid examples of teachers that do that, and could be used as modeling and examples that a cultural liaison could use when working with teachers to say, here are things you could try if they're finding that there are fractured relationships in the classroom. And then, I would say, anything by, Geneva Gay, Bell Hooks, Sonia Douglas Horsford, Dr. Yvette Jackson. There's a lot, of incredible work out there that I would say should just be part of the library of anybody that goes into this work and is going to say, I'm going to try to be a leader of this work in schools.
All right. Well, I want to say thank you so much for dropping those pearls of wisdom. There were like 17 drop the mic moments in this interview. And so I want to say thank you so much for spending time with us.
Of course.
And giving us a good, some very practical ways in which we should be looking at our work and how we operate within cultures and demand from those cultures that they see our humanity, and that schools are places where we actually, part of our business is to develop humanity among all of us, be it faculty, staff, students, what have you. But we're all in that space to be human, and so and build those relationships. So I want to say thank you so much for being with us.
Of course. I'll do anything for you, man. Let me know.
Right, man, the same here. You are a brother from another mother.
All right, buddy.
All right, man. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Take care.
All right.
Bye.